Hello, and welcome to the Mothers of All Crime. This is a podcast where we deep dive into mothers involved in infamous crimes and scandals. I'm Monica, and this is Crystal.
Our mother of the week is none other than Teal Swan.
Yeah, Teal Swan is an interesting one. Have you heard of her prior to us kind of starting to dive into this? And I know she was in the media a couple times with like documentaries and such, but did you hear about her before that came out? I was curious.
Yeah, so I watched The Deep End when that came out. I think I may have watched one thing that was earlier about her. And I listen to a lot of podcasts, so she's definitely come up,
hmm
but it was interesting to find out more about her and really pay attention to it because there's kind of a lot to unpack. Also, nothing.
Yeah,
She's sort of a mysterious figure.
absolutely. So I actually first learned about her when I was in college, and a friend, not really a friend, a classmate, floor mate, whatever you want to call them, was actually very interested in her and started kind of like there's like two groups of Teal Swan followers. There's the masses that I think actually can get some help to a degree from her. And then you have like her inner circle, where I think is when it gets a little bit more like culty and unsafe. But I originally heard of her when for one of these mass like lectures that she would do, and about just overall like mental health and awareness and
Mm.
spirituality. She kind of has like this glam guru like name attached to her, which I think is kind of funny, which is different than a lot of the other
Yes.
ones that we've talked about.
She's an influencer primarily, I would say. She's a content creator. She got huge on YouTube, is essentially how she became famous. And I am lucky, I think, that I did not stumble on her at in bad periods of my life. Um, because I do think that she is compelling in a way that I don't often find cult leaders. She's very, very charismatic. She definitely styles herself as a spiritual guru, though, and which is good because she doesn't have any credentials that would make her be a mental health professional of any kind. But she does speak with a lot of authority on many topics.
Yeah. And well, I think her, because I wondered why she didn't end up going and getting qualifications, because it seems like she's a very intelligent person. And at least she projects herself like that. And I think that contradicts kind of what she's selling. Her sell as a spiritual leader is that she has the ability to kind of see the inner you, to read your aura, to help you heal those inner traumas by just simply looking at you. She can like reflect your pain as a mirror and help you heal from those traumatic experiences. And I agree with you. She is one of the first ones that we've talked about and I've done the research where I get it. Like I understand how people end up in this one. There are some like Scientology, I think that in this day and age, I just don't understand how they're getting new followers. But like 50 years ago, without the internet, I totally get it. But Teal Swan, I totally see how people could get drawn to her. And for people who have never seen a picture of her, she is the kind of stereotypical standard of beauty. She's tall, thin, long, beautiful, dark hair. And she has these like piercing blue eyes that even in a video in a computer on your phone, it feels like she's looking directly at you, which is creepy and also like comforting. Like unlike anything that I've
Yeah.
seen anyone else do. Like it's quite impressive, honestly.
She doesn't have a lot of the factors that would deter me from joining other people's cult, which we could get into if Teal Swan is a cult leader or not, because that is a controversy and not everyone thinks that she is. But let's just say, let's just say she was trying to sell me on her cult. She doesn't have a lot of the things that would normally deter me. She's not preaching religion necessarily. She's preaching spirituality, self understanding, mindfulness, meditate, like it's all kind of new agey healing practices, but they're not religious in nature. She makes some kind of references in interviews to like being raised with like a Christian understanding. She grew up with a lot of Mormon people, wasn't Mormon herself, but she definitely has some Christian references, which who doesn't? You know, I mean, that's just living in America, it's being part of the world. But that's not her main shtick. And she is, as you said, beautiful. She's charismatic. She's a woman, which in some ways makes me feel a little bit less guarded. Not in it entirely, but just if I'm being 100% honest, I'm a little bit less physically scared of her. So I'm a little bit less intimidated in general. She also, she is like a girl's girl kind of in some ways, where she's a feminist when it suits her to her audience, and she's always talking about how men are dragging women down. And I could definitely see how, especially if someone was having like, I mean, any kind of depressive or interpersonal issue that someone was having, because she also, the way she frames things around mental health, it kind of takes a lot of the blame and guilt off of you, and it's more about just like how we can fix this going forward. I like a lot of her approaches, and I
Yeah,
don't
I
actually
agree
think
because
all
I
of her
think
advice
that's
is
where
bad.
that line draws is the there are a lot of people from the external masses because she's putting on lectures for hundreds and thousands of people that pay to listen to her talk. And I think those people probably can get some really good like advice and help, but I also think the few that get hit at that wrong time, it can be really dangerous. And I agree with you. She has this projection where
Oh yeah.
she kind of presents that she never wanted to do this. She was called to this by some kind of like exterior higher power. Because in interviews and documentaries, she openly is like, I never wanted to get into spirituality. I didn't want to do this, but how do you like not help people when you know you can kind of vibe. And I think this is going to be weird to say, but I think she's kind of a pioneer where how many women do you see in these charismatic roles and being accused of cults and leaders of organizations like this? You don't really see them. 99% of them are men. So it's kind of impressive.
Right. Or at least they have
Right.
some sort of main male figure. Even with Mother God, there was always a father God. I mean, with
Right.
Teal, she has been married and divorced
Yes.
5 times by my internet research. But she also gives a lot of marriage advice. But none of those guys like were focal points, because she also doesn't have a church. So she doesn't have to conform to a lot of the mainstream
Mm-hmm.
cult like archetypes that would normally give me
Yeah.
pause. It's just her. It's just her making YouTube videos. She runs a lot of lectures, and she's hosted many retreats, and she's had spiritual compounds, and that's all very problematic and cultish. But she claims that she just has a lot of
Mm.
gifts. Like she's a medical savant, for example, that she has access to all the thoughts of the universe. Every thought that's ever been thought, she has access to it and can review it all instantly. So it's like, how do you not help people if you have these
Right.
incredible gifts that she's
And
claiming that she has?
it's interesting when you think about the gifts is she claims, and this I have noticed kind of consistently with a lot of these gurus, is they kind of talk about their trauma and how they had this horrible history and this trauma that they endured,
Mm-hmm.
which awakened them in order to help other people. And it does create that level of security where, oh my God, what they went through is so much worse than I did. They definitely can help me. And for Teal, she was born in New Mexico, but she was raised in Utah, which, as we've talked about on past episodes, Utah is a huge
Mm-hmm.
religion based kind of state as a whole. And at a very early age, she said that she could see people's emotions, read people's minds, that she could see dead people, which gave me like bizarre.
Yeah. Synesthesia stuff where she
Yeah.
could see feelings, she could hear colors, all kinds of
Yeah, so rightfully
different
so,
sensory
she
experiences.
got put into
Yeah.
therapy by
She
her
was highly
therapist, which
sensitive.
honestly, if my kid came up to me and was like, I see dead people, I'd be like, counseling!
Yeah.
Like, here we go! And it's just, she got tons of diagnoses, none of which
Yeah.
that she believes or agrees with. And her reasoning is because, like, people just didn't understand
Hmm.
this gift that she had. So they just put labels on her.
Right, exactly. Which I do want to talk about what you would diagnose her with if we were in the position of diagnosing. I mean, she did have a very meaningful, it seems, experience when she went to China. I mean, her parents really tried a lot of different types of therapy. They brought her many
Yeah.
places. They tried to have her spiritually healed, psychically healed, psychologically healed. I don't know if it did a lot of good. I mean, it definitely exposed her to a lot of terminology, which actually maybe it was a bit problematic. A lot of her information about psychology seems to come
Yeah.
from previous experiences that she's had in therapy, some of which are extremely questionable because one of Teal's big claims is that she
Mm-hmm.
survived ritualistic cult abuse, that she was
Yeah.
in essentially the satanic panic. And I mean, I don't believe that, and there is no proof of it. And she did try to have charges pressed, and there was no proof of it. I mean, I think that she had a very suggestive therapist, and I don't think I believe that memories are repressed in the way that she describes it, or that she tries to have her followers dig up. I mean, I think memory is very complicated, and you don't remember things as a video, but the idea that you could be ritualistically abused for years in a devil worshipping cult and have no knowledge of it, I mean, that has not been proven to be
Yeah.
true in any other instance with the satanic panic. So
Yeah. So for
I
people who
think
don't know, the
that,
Satanic Panic
yeah,
basically was a period in the
yeah,
80s, very soon after kind of the Jonestown catastrophe that went on. And a bunch of suburban families started to get scared that satanic cults were like infiltrating their neighborhoods and were going to terrorize their children. And it was definitely kind of an unfounded fear that just grew. I'm sure there were groups because there are people who claimed being a part of stuff like this. But it was definitely not as bad as people thought it was. And it was one of those things that she went into a therapist who did recovery memory theory. And modern therapy now is like, it's super dangerous. It actually implants false memories. And I think that's where you get that idea of like you said, it can't be all true. Um, because that investigation that got opened was basically closed due to lack of evidence. And she made claims about like being hooked up to electrodes and abused, and then they would put up like videos and pictures of like dead animal carcasses, and every time that one would change they'd shock her, and she didn't remember this, but all of a sudden it got developed in her brain that she had killed these animals and that's what they forced her to do, and it just kept evolving. But one thing that I do actually think that happened, that
yeah,
through, if you weave through all of the quote trauma history she has, she did say that there was this man in his upper 60s that came into her life during her parents' attempt to try and help her. Again, like you said, they were doing all types of different options because nothing seemed to be working. They found one man who said that he could help her and he understood the problems that she was claiming, and he ended up sexually abusing her for years. That I actually Yeah, according to her.
according to her.
That is
Which
the only
maybe it's
one that
true, but it is just
seems
alleged.
true to me, just because if you watch her talk about that one versus a lot of the other
Hmm.
ones, like her facial expressions, there's a slight difference I noticed where I don't know if it probably happened to that extreme, but I do feel like that something, there's a seed of truth in that one story compared to all of the other ones that she talks about.
I mean, there very well may be. So I listened to the Gateway podcast, which is excellent, and I highly recommend it to anyone that wants to know more about Teal Swan. And Teal has never publicly named the person that she says sexually abused her, but it is a known thing apparently who it is, and he was interviewed in that podcast, and
Mm,
he is weird, and he did say weird things about like how she
right.
probably just
Like it
misinterpreted
just
all
felt
of the hugs
icky.
that he would give her. And it's like, well, it's like, all right, so maybe you did some weird stuff. I don't
Agreed.
think there was a devil worshipping cult. I mean, we definitely should do an episode at some point about the Mick Martin preschool and all of the, because it is a larger issue, but it's just important for the context of Teal Swan that her therapist was someone that ascribed to that and was
Yeah.
had other people uncovering memories in that way. Um, but I think that you're right that there maybe was some real abuse. Um, and also, I think if you didn't actually experience those kind of traumas, I mean, I heard one interview where they were saying that Teal claimed that she was sewn inside of a dead body
Oh
as
my
part of
God.
her ritualistic cult abuse. I mean, if she even believed that for 5 minutes, which I don't really think she did, but if she
Yeah.
believed any of that stuff, like that's extremely traumatic, because and that's the whole problem with the her now helping people uncover their traumatic memories is it may not necessarily be true, but your
Mm-hmm.
perception of reality is your reality, so you are still having to deal with all of these uncovered memories and your relationships with those people that were involved in those memories. Whether it was true or not, you are still dealing with the
Yeah.
consequences of it as
And
if it was true.
through um deep something, deep end, deep there was a docu-series that was done. Deep end. There's so
Hmm.
many deep somethings
Yeah,
out there.
deep end.
So didn't want to say the wrong one. But there was actually a girl in there that
Yeah.
did that exact thing where her first start of her kind of interview is she had a very normal childhood from what she remembered. And then through her processing, found and recovered memories that were traumatic from her parents. And you got to wonder how real that is because there's so many people in her circle and her teal tribe that all of a sudden don't talk to their parents and all of a sudden believe that there was abuse when everyone around them and their family saying none of this happened. Teal is brainwashing them, but it can't all be like real. You know what I mean? Like you can't have every single one of your followers just all of a sudden develop this and
Mm-mm.
then isolate themselves from their family. It's too convenient.
It's convenient. And Teal Teal herself has said that she has the perfect situation if she wanted to have a cult. She has all of the ingredients for a cult, but she's so moral and so scrupulous that she would never have one. But one of the critical components, according to Teal, is to have people who are desperate and to have people who are isolated. And if you take someone who's already in a terrible mental situation and tell them, convince them, make them relive how abusive and horrible their families are, it's not going to endear them closer to their families. It's not going to improve their isolation. It's only going to draw them into Teal's circle, into her intentional community. And that's what a lot of cult leaders do, because if you have a strong supportive family system, if you have a big group of friends, if people are looking out for you, then you're more likely to be resistant to this type of way of thinking and this type of living that you would just go
Sure.
full on and
Oh,
be a Teal
absolutely.
supporter. You'd
And I
probably be
think
a
you hit
little
the
more
nail on the head
reserved.
where one of her big things is you need to relive your trauma in order to heal from it. And she puts on these like
Mm-hmm.
retreats and workshops, mainly kind of out of Costa Rica. She's distanced herself a little bit from the United States, where most of her in-person stuff is international, which is smart and depending. I mean, Costa Rica was a good choice because there's not a ton of history there, but the United States is starting to become a lot more aware of these types of groups and the ability to prosecute them. Kind of looking at like Keith Raniere as a big one lately, where they found laws that they could actually criminally charge him with, and other countries have started putting
Mm-hmm.
coercive control laws into place, mostly like European countries and things like that. But Costa Rica isn't one of those countries that's had any crazy stories, at least not that I'm aware of. So I think it was very strategic for her to put herself there.
I agree. I don't think that she said that she was led there spiritually, that it was just meant to be, that she'd never been to Costa Rica and she just bought that property sight unseen that she had there, that she was running all of her sessions out of, and people would come and spend thousands of dollars to stay there with her. I mean, if you wanted to go for a week, it was over $4,000 even if you were still sharing a room. But I think that it's no coincidence that she picked somewhere with less laws, where
Mm-hmm.
she was going to be a little bit more off the radar. I mean, I think that America's probably the worst place to be if you want to have
Yeah.
a cult with no consequences. Would you consider Teal to be a cult leader?
I I think she treads the line. Like, I don't know, because I really go back and forth depending on what parts of it is. I think her inner circle definitely is cult like, but she also, at the same time, from a larger perspective, because her inner circle is not very big, but she affects thousands around the world. And I don't think at the that scale she is, because she does keep this inner circle super small and she doesn't go out and recruit. She doesn't go out and try to bring people into this inner circle, which I think is a key part to be a true cult leader. I think she definitely treads that line though, where her inner circle is very hard to get out of. It is super controlling. There's a list of like mandatory things you have to agree to be part of it, where Teal is the primary. You can't have personal boundaries with her. You aren't allowed outside associations that are not approved, and all these other things. Where that part, I think she is, but I think from a greater scale, I I think she toes that line where technically she's not. What are your thoughts?
So I feel like she has a lot of cult vibes for sure. She seems like a cult leader in a lot of ways, but the pay structure to be in the cult is not typical. She doesn't make most of her revenue from her members. It's she makes a lot of it from YouTube and creating content. So in the sense that she needs followers on the internet, I mean, she could be cult like in that way, but her in-person members, that's not where she's making all of her money. Those are more of just people for her
Mm,
to hang out with all the time and henchmen. And I don't it's more of like a mob kind of a situation, because I don't think that Teal is looking to have a dozen, 100, 1,000 members. I mean, to your point, she wants it small, and she wants to sell her books. She wants to tour. She wants to do these retreats. She wants to make tons of videos and have a lot of likes and follows and things like that, but she doesn't have memberships the way that
Right.
a lot of other cults do. And there isn't
I
scripture
mean, there
holding
are
everybody
plenty of
together.
cults that don't involve
So,
scripture. I think they're just less popular. Because you have groups like, I don't know, like Nexium, for example, which is a self-help group. There are like a lot of political cults that I'm sure we'll get into at some point, but it's an interesting one where a lot of those ones do stay under the radar, and she is so public about her stuff, which I think is why it's so intriguing. And you're right, she's an influencer. So she kind of has tapped into that market of TikTok and YouTube and Instagram. And I looked at her like pricing structure on her website. Like you mentioned, there's like a 2 week completion process that you can sign up for, which is about $5,000. But then,
mm,
yes,
so I think that's maybe her most
absolutely.
cult-like thing.
But then a
But
lot of
we
them,
we
they
could
just
talk
kind of
about
start
that.
going
Yeah.
down. You have the yearly exclusive insights for $5.99. You have courses like the ancestral healing, which is like 600, how to thrive in a crisis, a little under 400, self-love, 200, sexual healing, 270. And then you have the completion course that you can do on your own for $1,997. And this one I think is the most interesting from her pay structure, because this is the where they kind of advertise you have a 15-day money back guarantee. However, the course is 9 weeks long. So, like, how do you decide if it is worth a money back or not if it's 9 weeks? Like, you got 2 weeks to figure it out. Like,
I mean, I guess you could take like the first class and be like, never mind. But otherwise, yeah, you're right. That is a scam for sure. Sounds like it. Oh man. I mean, I'm more scared, I feel like, about the people who have actually done the completion and
mm,
are now coaches for others. It's very, but you know what? It's like all of these groups, like these high control groups, which I guess we could call it, they have a lot of similar things in the sense that
yeah,
you're teaching people to teach people your message. And I think that the completion process, part of it, what really scares me is she has real doctors that do the completion process and become like whatever it's, I don't know what it's
I don't
called,
remember. I couldn't find any
completioners.
kind of
I
title,
don't know if
but
there's a word for it.
it just adds validity to it though for her. If you have
It's
people
just
with
like,
legitimate degrees supporting
yeah,
you, it builds a legitimacy for what you're claiming. And if they're putting you above themselves, again, putting her on this pedestal where you have her people basically comparing her to Jesus and her goal to be more influential than the Pope
hmm,
internationally, which again is a very big thing to be like, I want people to
ugh.
listen to me more than this basic ancient position that is world renowned. Like everybody knows who the Pope is, regardless of your religious beliefs, and they understand the authority that comes with that
Right.
position. And she wants to outrank him. That's like her goal, which is wild to me. You're
Well,
right.
I mean, she has more powers than Jesus did, and she compares herself pretty directly to him, but I think she definitely thinks that she's an improvement. I don't think that she thinks that she is like the next Messiah. It's kind of beyond that, where she's like not even like
Mm,
she's not an alien, but she's otherworldly.
yeah.
She's like magical, the things that she can do. And she can, because she can see into your body and she can see your blood moving and she can see your heart beating and she
Ew.
can
Why
see
would you
what you
want to
ate
see that too?
earlier today and if you're inflamed from the gluten. I mean,
Ugh.
I don't know why she would want to see it, But something I thought was really interesting, though, was in one of the interviews, um, Jennings Brown is the guy that does the podcast. He also made the Deep End. He asked her, well, if you know everything that's ever been known and you know every thought that's ever been thought and you have all of this access to all of this information and you know everything, then why don't you speak any other languages? And she was like, huh, yeah, I have been meaning to look into that. I don't know why that
Yeah.
is. It's like she's so good when she's confronted, but she speaks with such authority, and then she gives this authority to other people who have credentials. And there are real psychiatrists that do the completion process and advocate for Teal and her methods and are trying to help her put
Right.
together clinical
And
trials, which have not happened.
he
But
was funny. I listened to another interview of him years after all of these were done. And when he first met with Teal before either the documentary started, he did an interview with her, brought it back to his whatever company he was working for, because I think it was like a journal article or magazine or whatever it was. They flat out were like, we can't use this because she got to you. Like the first time he met with her and interviewed her, she was so charismatic and so convincing that his interview turned into basically a praise of how amazing she was and how great. And like they had to scrap the whole thing and he had to start over. So like it kind of just shows you, even if you go in skeptical and you go in with like a plan of, hey, we're gonna uncover this. She has all these accusations. She has this ability to turn people without even realizing that you're being turned. He had no clue until his editor was like, this is bad. Like,
absolutely. I mean,
mhm.
she comes off really well and she seems kind of amazing. Sometimes, like, I watched some of her more recent YouTube videos and I went into those videos having a lot of knowledge about the problems with Teal Swan, and I still was like, huh,
Yeah,
huh, huh. It's kind of scary. Like, I
yeah,
feel like if I was in a really bad spot, she could get me. And I think we should talk about the
yes.
really bad spot that a lot of people find her in, which I maybe we should have warned people at the start, but I think if you're at all familiar with Teal Swan, you know that
Mm-hmm.
suicide is a huge topic that comes up a lot. And Teal has certainly structured her teachings and her YouTube and everything around suicide because that is a very difficult topic for psychologists, for psychiatrists, for all mental health professionals. It's difficult to treat. It's hard to talk about. People are worried about contagion,
Mm-hmm.
are worried about all kinds of things. And Teal is not worried about any of those things. She wants to talk about it. And she has even invested in SEOs, like search engine optimizations, that if you type in suicide or other things that
Yeah,
are similar to that, her videos will pop up. All of her website, everything will pop up. She is looking for the acutely distressed people.
yeah. And I think when it comes
Those
to
are her
the
target
searching,
audiences.
it is also just how much content she pumps out too about how high on those search engines she does come.
Hmm.
And I agree. If anybody has any concerns with this topic, this might be a good place to stop, or put yourself in a positive mindset with it, because there are going to be some quotes that we probably will discuss that can be a little triggering. Um, but she based this foundation off of her own suicide attempt that she had as a teenager and was actually admitted to a psych ward for. And she presents this idea that it depends on how you ask her, because she presents it that she doesn't actually support suicide. She doesn't want this for people. She wants people to heal and be the best selves that they can. And it's, you listen to some of her one-on-ones and it is very supportive to a degree. And then you listen to other one-on-ones and she pushes people to really uncomfortable thoughts and makes statements like, then why are you still on this earth? You're, but then it contours with your life might be worth sticking around for. And it's that back and forth that gives her like plausible deniability for a lot of it. But you have comments like
Absolutely.
her reincarnation. That's, I think, a connection too, is she's claims that she's lived all these multiple lives and experienced death
Mm-hmm.
multiple ways, some of which is suicide, some of it is just natural. And she says things to people
Right.
directly like,
Mm-hmm.
death is a gift you give yourself, or suicide is like pressing the reset button because you're just going to come back as something else. And if you're in a fragile state and
Absolutely.
already in certain kinds of pain and questioning, comments like that, I can see how it drives people to consider it more versus the opposite.
Yes. I think that if you looked at it, it depends on your lens, which of course is the problem because she is targeting people who are already struggling immensely. But depending on your lens, because you could
Mm-hmm.
say like Teal is encouraging suicide, but I think that there's another way to look at it is what she's saying is if it's a reset button, if it's always an option, that there's no reason to rush towards it. And that you might as well try to live your life. You might as well try a lot of things because
Yeah.
there's
Oh,
it will always be there. And yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's a terrible point to make, but I think like if you're
yeah,
acutely
because
depressed, maybe
she
that's
does
not a
also
good thing
have
to say.
these challenging when people express that that is one thing that they're even more strongly considering. She flips it and then will make statements like, if you're asking the question, if it's my time is done on this earth, then your time isn't done yet. And again, supporting that, okay, then maybe there's options. And I do think one point that she made during one of her lectures is people have a fear of death. That is a very real thing. Regardless if you are suicidal or not, having a fear of death is very common for a lot of people. And her perspective is that's an unnatural thought because regardless of how you die, everybody does. So she approaches suicide from that one lecture as in
Mm-hmm.
you have to make up your mind. Are you going how you're going to die? Are you going to do it yourself? Is it going to be natural? Is it going to be by someone else's hand? It's her in a way empowering the individual's decision. I think is that other perspective to look at too. And so you have three options that we have now where
Sure.
it really depends on the mental state of the person listening to her.
Yeah, it definitely does. And she talks about, I mean, it's brought up a lot that her first client
Mm-hmm.
that died by suicide, Leslie, um, she was Teal claims that this woman had already tried everything else, had already tried doctors and medication and all types of other treatments other than going to Teal. And she just there was no hope for her, basically is how Teal tells it now. But when she did pass away,
Mm.
she was reincarnated within 2 days. So, in that sense, it was a reset button. And she was asked about it many years later. And when asked if she did anything wrong with Leslie, she says no. She said she did everything right and that was a good outcome, basically. It's like there's nothing wrong with suicide, is basically her, which I don't necessarily disagree with, I guess. But
Right.
it's the point of encouraging it where
Yeah,
it's
and I
very,
think that's
very
where a lot of
scary.
people have their concerns is because the people listening to her are typically very vulnerable. Um, but then when you start diving into people's numbers on how many people have actually followed through, and there's only two that I could find that have been confirmed followers of Teal that have taken their own lives. there's a lot of skepticism thinking that there's probably a lot more because, again, she's so. You could just watch her on your computer one night, never watch anything else, and have go, yep, confirmed, and then have consequences. And there's no way to track that. And I think that's
True.
where people
Oh, that's a good
are
point.
icky.
Right. Because it's like,
Right.
what makes you a follower of Teal? Like, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you even could not even ever see anything that Teal has made, but it could be one of her
Right.
proxies that's done the completion process, that views Teal as a mentor, that's posting their things, that's talking to people in real life. It would be impossible to track it down. I do know that there's
Oh,
been many
absolutely.
attempts by
Yeah.
group members, but I don't know. She really scares me in the way that she talks about it, but I don't know
Mm-hmm.
that it's so terrible also. I mean,
Sure.
there's some truth and
And
sense to what she says,
I think that's what makes
which
people
is
both
scary as well.
comforted by her as well as scared by her. Because it is a topic that people are very uncomfortable with, that most people, if they're having those thoughts, don't typically express either. And she has conversations that people don't want to have. And I think that's what she plays on to get support as well. And it would be interesting to try and kind of figure out what level that these people are collecting on saying that there's only two quote followers, but how many people has it actually touched that had some kind of listened to her or saw a video or TikTok or whatever the case was. It would be interesting if there was any way to count that, and there's not. But right.
I mean, maybe if she
If
did
she
her
actually
clinical
has these
trials, we
amazing
could find
powers, she
out.
would be able to know. But uh,
Well,
I
that's
don't know.
true.
And
Yeah. But also, it's like, even if her followers were dying by suicide, it wouldn't necessarily, it would be hard to say that it's all Teal's fault, or that the blame, or that it wouldn't have happened without Teal being in, like, because you don't look at a doctor, a hospital, like parents, whatever. You don't look at them and say, that's the reason they failed and this is why this
yeah,
happened.
it would be that gray area.
So
Really just depends, I think, on the case, probably.
it's
Um,
it's it's very gray.
but then she has these weird ritualistic sides to her too that come up, where she does like healing journeys but uses frog poison and has you ingest it, and then basically vomiting out your like issues and dealing with your trauma and reliving it while that's happening, which I also think is crazy. And you wonder why people get so attached to her. It's because they have these super intense moments like that. Or in the deep end, there's a clip of someone who challenged her and then basically gets punished more or less with like a waterboard scene, and to teach her to like relive certain trauma that she had. I don't know how she gets away with some of that. And her followers are just like, yep, on it. We'll go do XYZ. And they don't question. And I think that's where, again, it goes a little bit more culty. It just, Teal said it. Got to do it. Got it.
Absolutely. But I
Mm-hmm.
guess it's also like, they're adults that are consenting. And is that really
That's the thing. She hasn't
illegal?
anything, nothing that I found other than her
I don't think so.
rules for the inner circle, which I couldn't find a full like actual list, but from what I've heard, there are illegal things on that list, um, from the United States standard. But again, they're not in the United States. um, but she's not doing anything illegal.
Right.
She's not directly putting her hand to someone or like handing them a knife or doing something traumatic herself. It's all this eluding, you do it to yourself. You visualize doing this or you relive this. It's her guiding them to, which I don't think is technically illegal, but I guess you could approach the avenue of like,
I don't think it is.
if you encourage someone to go kill someone, you're still held responsible for that murder. Like, look at Gypsy Rose. She claims she had no involvement, but she basically
Right.
influenced it. You're still responsible. So I think that's the avenue they would probably take with Teal if they were to try to make that case.
Yeah. I think that if she told her members to kill someone and they did, she would maybe be prosecuted for that. She probably would be. But anything short of that, I have a hard time believing that she would actually be prosecuted. I could see more like if she's not paying taxes or if she's doing something illegal on that end. I could see that easily being
Mm-hmm.
a problem that could come up for her, like legally. But I don't think that she's going to have
Yeah, I don't know.
criminal
And
charges.
for her too, what is kind of weird is she's not super wealthy. Like you said, there's not a ton of money coming in. And she does seem to pay for everything herself. So there is this community compound basically where you go to these retreats, but also her and her inner circle live on. And it's a gated little compound basically in the middle of Costa Rica. And the people there are quote volunteers, where you're getting free room and board, but you're
Mm-hmm.
not paying for anything else, but you're volunteering all of your time and working 24/7. But I think, yeah, but she's paying for
Service,
the bills of
unpaid
the
labor.
property and
Yeah.
food and lights and all that stuff. So it is interesting where that weird balance. So she doesn't, I think the number I found is her net worth's only like $1 million, which for how long she's been around, I would have guessed would have been way higher.
Hmm.
And she's been
That is
married 5
interesting.
times and struggles making those connections on herself. But also, you would think if you've been married, you would have some kind, I don't, is she paying them money? Like, she has one son that we know almost nothing
Well,
about.
I know. And I did try to find information about him. I could find some images of him scattered throughout her
Yeah.
Instagram and stuff, but there's very little information, which is good for him, obviously. And I hope for him that he is like safe and that he has a normal childhood existence. But I don't think she's super hands-on or involved. I mean, maybe he's with her all the time and she's just not constantly sharing pictures of
Yeah.
him, but I kind of find that hard to believe. I think that
That's where
she may be paying
I
child
kind
support.
of left with it. So his name is Winter, which I actually kind of like. um, Winter Scott, and he is pretty much an adult now at this point. Um, but again, he's very removed from a lot of her stuff. And my guess is because that he's probably with dad, and it's an easy way to avoid that. And she does seem to protect him because there are blog posts that I found where she briefly kind of talks about him, but also that she goes down a different avenue. And there aren't pictures and there aren't conversations. Any conversation I saw that they brought up her son, she instantly almost was like switched it back to the inner child and not her kid. So she does seem to have some kind of
Right.
maternal bond for him where she does try to protect him and he is removed from a lot of stuff versus a lot of other people in her type of positions where they capitalize on the fact they have children. She seems to do the exact opposite.
She definitely does not promote herself as a mom figure, momfluencer. Agreed.
Oh,
I
is
just
he?
looked it
Okay.
up, and it looks like Winter is 15. So yeah. Well, I found a birthday post that she did when he turned
All
11
right.
in
Yeah.
2020. So I'm just doing some quick math on that. Yeah, but I mean, he's older. Like he's not a baby for sure. He's not a little kid. He's in high school. Um, but yeah, I don't think it really fits with. I think most of her personal life doesn't fit with the things that she's trying to
Hmm.
promote. So she just leaves it out. And like because she does offer a lot of family marriage advice, and she doesn't have a lot of success with that in her real life. So I think it just doesn't look good.
Yeah.
So she just doesn't mention it, which
Yeah,
isn't a bad
absolutely.
strategy.
And it is also kind of interesting how she only had children with her first husband, Mark, and all of the ones after that,
Hmm.
they were all very short lived, obviously, but she didn't have children with any of them. So you got to wonder what connection she had with Mark and how that was different and how that ended. I'd be super curious. I couldn't find anything about her actual marriages and the development or download. Um,
Yeah, I couldn't either. I found some information about two of her husbands, but she says that she's had five husbands. And I believe her, I guess. I think that Teal
yeah.
is probably very captivating to initially date, and people get infatuated with her, and then it just you can't maintain
Yeah,
that kind of level of
the only
infatuation in
one
real
is
life.
Blake, who was like her
That's
right-hand
what I would
man for
guess.
20 years. They were romantic for 1 year and then
Hmm.
just stayed friends. But she, it's kind of funny during the docuseries, she got very jealous when he had met someone new. And she would bring up, like,
Mm,
how do you think your new girl, wife, basically, they end up getting married, how does your wife feel about like your attraction to me? And he was like, listen, yeah, I think you're attractive. He's like, but it's over. Like he very kindly put it, like, which was interesting. She got very
right.
possessive, I think, with him. And currently, he actually left the group altogether. So he's not even with her anymore now that he found someone who I think showed him a different perspective than Teal's isolation. And I could only find the first three husbands personally. I agree. I couldn't find the last two. Um, but it was 2012, 2014, 2016. And then she apparently had two more after that. But 2024, she's been single for a while. So they wonder if they were just kind of, for like 10 years, bing, bang, boom. And then was like, okay, now we're done.
I think that she takes things that she needs, she soaks up attention, she thrives on attention. And I wouldn't be surprised if she got certain things out of each marriage. I mean, she got Swan out of one of her marriages. Like, I thought that Teal Swan was a made up name before looking into this, but Teal is her real middle name. And then Swan
Yeah.
is one of her former husband's last names. So Teal Swan is kind of her name.
It's a good name. Yeah.
And I mean, I think it's great, but I think that she is absolutely, but I think she's a little callous. I think that she is a bit cutthroat, and that she is very intelligent, and she has a lot of ability to read people, but she's not
Mm,
so good at maintaining her connections, because I don't think it lasts long term. And I she has a lot of people who are extremely passionate in her groups, and then they don't stay. And she says there's no penalty to leave, so maybe that's part of it. But I think that it's the kind of thing where you get extremely interested in it and then it kind of fades away. Maybe doesn't hold the test of time.
That's true.
But that's kind of perfect for the internet.
Mm-hmm.
For YouTube, for Instagram, for TikTok.
And
Yeah,
again, it makes
absolutely.
it harder to challenge a lot of what she says if they're all temporary relationships, which I think is why she keeps that inner circle so tight, is because it's easier
Yeah.
to defend herself if there's less people to claim that she's reading their minds against.
Yeah, that's true. That makes a lot of sense too.
Oh,
I think she's very
absolutely. There's no
strategic.
question. But she is the one that I think is kind of a mystery to a degree, where she has invited documentaries into her life and shown these insides, but like I finished watching some of them and I have more questions than I do answers because it provokes different things. And she's very
I agree.
strategic on what she shows. And when you look her up, there's not a ton of, other than the one dark cloud, there's not a lot of negative talk about her, frankly. For how widespread on the internet she is, there's not a lot of negative about her, which is in this day and age where everyone
Yeah.
just attacks everyone because you're behind a screen and it's easy to do, is kind of shocking.
I mean, honestly, I had some trouble in the beginning when I was trying to look into this person, this case, whatever we want to call it, before the podcast. I was having trouble finding a lot of negative things about her. Like, if you look at the first 20 things that come up, if you just look up Teal Swan, it's a lot of very positive things or just her content, which
Right.
she comes off extremely well in a lot of. So I was like,
Yeah.
what are we going to talk about, basically? And I had to look to other people that have done more investigations because on the
Yeah.
surface, it's kind of fine. But I think that if you go a little bit further with it, or if someone's in a very vulnerable position, I think that Teal could be really dangerous. But I think that there isn't a great alternative a lot of the time for people who are really, really struggling mentally and are contemplating self harm or suicidality. I think that it is really hard to find help and to find a doctor that would really be willing to engage in even talking about it is difficult. Um, and I think Teal tells people what they want to hear. Like, oh, well, if your medication's not working for you, just throw it out. Just flush it. Like, who cares? That stuff doesn't work. You don't need to call your doctor. It doesn't work. Just throw it out. Like, I think those kind of things can be really, really dangerous. She doesn't believe in medication, but telling someone to just go off of an
Right.
SSRI in itself is very dangerous. Um, Things like that need to be weaned. It's very complicated, and she's not actually a medical savant, so
What are
she
you
doesn't know
talking
what
about?
she's talking about.
Her website says she's
And
one of the
her
top
giving medical advice,
100 healthcare and health leaders in 2021.
yes. I mean,
Oh
that's very
God.
impressive. But I know that she doesn't have any medical training at all. You know who she reminds me of
Mm,
is the savior complex, where it's just like, I have decided that I know all of these things and
yeah.
I have all of these powers and I'm going to heal everyone through my thoughts, which is
Yeah. I
inherently
think
very harmful,
she's a
I
tough
think.
one to, because it just depends on what your mindset is when you look at her
Yeah.
and listen to her, and kind of what perspective you want to take, because you really could defend her from any angle, which is kind of different than a lot of the ones that we've talked about and will talk about.
I I agree. I think it's kind of ambiguous. I don't know that she's necessarily a criminal. Um Scandalous for sure, controversial for sure,
I think she's one
but
of
I'm
those
not
ones
sure
that
that
you
I
kind
would
of have to
consider her a
watch your back
criminal.
with. Like, she has potential to do some very dangerous
Oh
things,
yeah.
but there is also
Hmm.
testimonies of there being some good in there. So I also got to say though, she has paintings that she sells that apparently will heal you if they're just present with you, and I've never wanted to spend useless money more in my life. Have you seen these? So for people who have
Wow.
not, they're
Yeah, you'll have
these
to let me know.
like abstract kaleidoscope looking paintings that aren't that expensive, frankly. And if you buy them and you put them up in your room and you look at it every day, it's supposed to heal you. And I have never, I've like, I know
Well,
personally, I don't believe in that kind of stuff where this picture is going to heal me. If it did, I will buy 50 of them and I will plaster them in every single room of the house. But it's
well, I guess we
like
should wait for Christmas, maybe see what
wild
Santa's gonna bring
idea.
you.
And
I'll add
people,
this
like,
to the
good for her.
list.
People buy it. People spend money on these paintings and just put
Yeah.
them up in their house because it's going to make them feel better. And that's where I think she tapped in on, and this is just my perspective of that kind of stuff, of the placebo, where if you are told this is going to make you feel better, it's going to make you feel better because you convince yourself that it's working. And I think with things like that, that's exactly what she has done, where she's in a position of authority. She says, this is going to make you feel better. You then believe it and you look at it. And as you're looking at it, wow, I do feel better. Like, you do it to yourself. She doesn't even need to do anything else after that. Yeah.
Exactly. She kind of keeps her hands clean.
But that was one of my favorite things. They are pretty. I will say they are pretty.
I mean, I think that, yeah.
Mm.
I mean, she's got an aesthetic for sure. She's very creative. And I think part of her appeal on some of her videos is that she talks kind of monotone and she'll have like a psychedelic background. And if you're just kind of casually watching it,
Hmm.
you're still absorbing the information, but it's almost hypnotic to watch, which
Yes.
is very Warren Jeffs of her. But yeah, but I don't think I think everything with her is very intentional, which to me is problematic. I think that the paint, she wants to be
Yes.
in the background of
Absolutely.
everyone's thoughts.
Yeah, she's a character. All right. Well, that was everything I had. Is there anything else you can think of with Miss Teal Swan that we haven't covered? Yeah. So
No,
if
I
you
think we
were
hit all my
to,
points.
what's your favorite thing with her that, not maybe favorite's not the word I want, but like the thing you found most intriguing now that we kind of dove into her a little bit?
Hmm. I mean, I think her saying that she could literally
Hmm.
see into people's bodies really got me. Um, I just
Mm.
she has a lot of audacity, and I love when people make like outrageous claims. And she can see your thoughts. I mean, she knows everything, and I found that as like a standout
Yeah,
kind of thing. Probably my favorite thing about
the
her.
confidence is unreal.
How about you?
For me, I think is just very
Oh yeah,
similar. It's the presentation that she does, where she is both charismatic but also very comforting. She's not necessarily telling you to
hmm
do something specifically. She alludes to a lot of things, and I think she's the first one that I truly kind of go, all right, I see where people are coming from for her. So it was just a different perspective than what we've been used to lately.
yeah. No,
All right.
I definitely
Well,
agree with that.
thank you for talking with Miss Teal Swan. I thought she was kind of a fun one.
Yeah, she was. It was kind of light almost. I mean, some mental health stuff came up, but other than that,
No, not
she's
yet.
not actively murdering people, which And I don't think that she's sexually abusing people either.
A nice
So
reset
that's kind of nice, kind of
for
refreshing
the future
for a
ones.
Ugh.
Very
Bit
true.
of a palate
Well,
cleanser,
I am
if you
excited
will.
for our next mother coming up. We have some interesting ones coming up for sure.
Me too. Yeah, I definitely think we've got a good queue lined up.
Yes.
All right, well,
And I'll talk to you next
we will
time.
chit chat soon.